All right, guys, so let's get into section 7.2, which is talking about labor productivity. So, labor productivity is the value of what is produced per worker. So, remember when we talked about GDP, and I said that's kind of like how much output there is per person. Well, now let's actually get into the output per person. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more specific in terms of measuring it. Like, how much stuff are you able to make per day, per hour? How much labor productivity do you have? Okay. Sometimes it's called worker productivity. And basically, what's happening here is we are looking at a worker and we're trying to determine how productive they are. Now, certain things are going to help understand how productive someone is, one of them being their human capital. Human capital is just that knowledge that you have, like education and skills, that you're bringing to your job. Okay, so by you going and getting a certification, that's you having human capital to be able to do something. All right. Technological change. So inventions and innovation, those are great things that are going to be providing your productivity. Okay, by having some inventions that's using your knowledge to create something. By having technology, you're able to use machines to make more things, make more output, become more productive. Um, Economies of scale is another thing about just trying to make things more productive. Economies of scale is where you're using the cost advantage because you're so big. The bigger you are, the cheaper things are. So basically, in terms of labor productivity, the more employees you have, right, this might be able to lower your average cost of making something, and so you would be more productive. So these things right here are going to be able to determine how much productivity your workers have. The human capital is probably the most important. So like you getting an education is really increasing your productivity because you're increasing your education and your skills. That's going to make you more desirable in the labor market. All right. So basically, everything that we talked about in terms of just like what the people are producing, that's to do GDP. There are many factors that go into GDP, which is why we have a production function. The production function is basically where a firm is taking inputs like labor, capital, raw materials, entrepreneurship, taking all those things and creating output, which is GDP. So it's the process of making things happen, turning the inputs into the output. So right here, we would have the workforce, which is humans, and then we have their human capital, which is their education. We have the machines that the humans could use, and then we have the technology. So all of those inputs we can use to make output. Okay, so this is an aggregate production function. Okay, basically just aggregate meaning just like the total amount that you have. So from a microeconomic level, okay, this is describing a firm or industry's inputs and outputs. So basically, if you had a baker, flour, sugar, water, things like that, and an oven, you can create bread, right? So you have all those inputs to create the output. That's more of a microeconomic level. Macroeconomic level would be looking at how many humans you have, what's their education, what technology do you have, finally, all those things to make the output. GDP per capita, same thing, right? We're looking at the per person education. So, what is the average education level? Is it the average person having a high school degree? Is the average person having a bachelor's degree? And then physical capital, basically, how much machines can one person do? Technology per person, similar idea. Okay. So the aggregate production function, the process whereby an economy as a whole turns economic inputs such as human capital, physical capital, and technology into output. Okay. So that is the production function. You take the inputs to produce the output. How many inputs you have will change the amount of output you do. And each input has a different factor, meaning that human capital is really, really important. The amount of people you have and how educated they are has a very major impact on GDP. Because without machines, without humans, right? There's no one to operate the machine, so then you definitely can't produce things. So some of these will have a major factor than different than others. Okay. So let's look here. An economy's rate of productivity is closely linked to the growth rate of its GDP per capita. So basically, when we're looking at like the increases in education for a person, okay, basically if education is going up, so is GDP per capita. So we can relate these two in the sense that, oh, hey, because people are getting more educated, we also see people getting higher GDPs. So they are closely linked. A common measure of U.S. productivity per worker is the dollar per hour that the worker contributes to the employer's output. So basically, what's happening here is we're going to look at the dollar value that you're doing per hour. So basically, if we're looking at T-shirts and you make 10 T-shirts and all those T-shirts are $10, your output per hour is $100 per hour. Okay? So we're looking at the dollar value. So like that's how we could measure productivity. That's one way. The average U.S. worker produced over twice as much per hour in 2020 than they did in 1970s. Why would that happen? Why would we be able to produce over twice as much in 2020 as 1970? Well, if we're looking at the 70s when we had lower technology, we had more high school dropouts and more high school graduates than we do today. We have more bachelor degree people. We have more graduate degrees today. We have much better technology today. We have more machines that are doing things faster than a human would in 1970. So because we're changing and evolving our inputs over time, we are definitely increasing our productivity over time, the production function. Okay, and as you can see here, we're just constantly increasing our GDP. Okay. So the new economy, all right, because of the increases in technology, especially from the 1990s, communication and information is being passed much faster. So some people are saying about the new economy is this age of the new technology. For instance, like emails and computers that are much faster. We're able to communicate across the world right now. Okay, because of the new economy. Okay, some argue that this will increase the average productivity in the long run. Okay, obviously, right? It's like, okay, well, if I'm able to contact people in another country, we can get more business deals done. That'd be great. Others argue that we will not see increases in this productivity in the long run. Now, they argue that we are reaching a point where, kind of like the diminishing marginal returns, where we're reaching that point where technology is increasing, but not as much as it used to. So we're not going to have these big increases in productivity anymore in the long run. We're actually going to be just leveling off and slowly increasing, not having these big increases in productivity. So what we can see is that there's going to be some different changes going on. We're going to need some more data and some more time in order to really determine how technology is going to be playing a factor in the future. We can see on how your GDP per capita changes whenever wage changes. So we can definitely look at that. Based on this chart here, we can see how wages play a role in the growth. So let's look at Australia. Okay, every time we have GDP growth, look at the look at the hours worked. Okay, so basically we're trying to be more productive in terms of hours worked, and sure enough, GDP is going up. Whenever the real worked goes down, you can see that GDP growth was smaller, but when it was, especially here, right, is that when we had a decrease in hours worked, we definitely had a decrease in the GDP per capita. So we can see how they're closely related, for sure. Okay, so in terms of hours worked, that definitely has an impact on your GDP per capita. We can see how this changes for for those different countries. Now, how can we have sustained growth? Sustained economic growth is where nothing is more important than a person's standard of living than sustained economic growth. So basically, we do want to continue growing, and we want to make sure that we continue growing. Even small changes in the rate of growth, when sustained and compounded over long periods of time, make an enormous difference in the standard of living. So basically, because you're growing at 3% every year, what's going to happen is over time, every time you increase 3%, this is increasing even more 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. So basically, what we're trying to say here is using this growth formula, which basically is kind of like the percent change. All you're doing is the GDP where you start and then multiply it by the growth rate and then raise it to how many years you want to go. So basically, if we were in 2000 and your GDP was 100 and you're growing at 3%, okay, so let's say your GDP was 100, you're growing at 3%, and you want to look at what your GDP is in 5 years, okay, and then what you would do is you would do 100 times 1.03 raised to the 5th power. Okay, and just to give you that number there, that would be that would be 115. Okay, so basically, if we grew 3% for 5 years, we went from 100 to 115. If we did that for different growth rates, you can see how it changes. So, for instance, the value of 100 in 10 years, growing at 8%, gets you from 100 to 216. Now, the sustained economic growth is when we go to 25 years. So that 100 will turn into 685. That 100 will turn into 4,690. So basically, we want the sustained economic growth. We want to keep going up because when you keep going up, then your GDP will compound on top of that. Okay? There's also a little tool here to basically see how long your GDP is going to take to double. So basically, if your GDP was 100 and you're growing at 3%, okay, it would take you 33.33 years to double. Okay? So this is called the rule of 72, where basically you just take the amount of GDP you have, divide it by the growth rate, and then this is a rough estimate on how long it will take your GDP to double. And you can do this with investments as well. So like if you had, let's say, $500 and you put it in a bank account that paid you 10% interest, you would just do 500 divided by 10 and it should double. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, hold on. Oh, 72. Sorry, I messed this up. What you do is 72 divided by the growth rate and 24. Okay, so that's what you do. You take the 72 divided by the growth rate, and it'll take you that long to double. Okay, so 24 years to double at 3%. If you were making a bank account that made 10% interest, you would do 72 divided by 10. So that would double in 77.2 years. Okay, that's how long it would take to double there. Okay, so it just takes 72 divided by the growth rate, and then that'll tell you how long it takes to double. Just a little tool for you. So we already talked about the tools for economic growth. Okay, we really want to look at the capital, whether it be the human capital, right, or the physical capital. We need to improve the physical infrastructure of our country in order to make better and better things. We need to increase the quality and the quantity of our buildings, the quality of our roads, because if we have better roads, people can go to work, and then if they go to work, they can increase productivity. Technology, right? Technology needs to keep on increasing if we want to keep on growing. And there's a little thing called capital deepening. So basically, that's when a society increases the level of capital per person. So basically, what we're doing here is you're basically having a person, and you're adding their experience and their education, right? You're deepening that human capital, and you're able to increase the physical capital as well. So basically, now you can work on different machines. All right. So capital deepening. The idea of capital deepening can also apply both to additional human capital per worker and physical capital per worker. So like for you getting your master's or your PhD, capital deepening. Okay. If you're able to do and work on different machines, capital deepening. Finally, I'll leave you off with the healthy climate for economic growth. So you are going to need these things in order to healthily grow your economy. Some areas in which governments around the world have chosen to invest in these areas to facilitate capital deepening and technology. So that's why governments really want to invest in education. That's why they give you their different scholarships. That's why they give you the different loan programs so that you can go to school and you can get an education so you can increase your productivity. That's also why we have savings and investments, right? Maybe we'll have a lower tax on capital gains. So capital gains is basically when you collect your investment, you have to pay a tax on that investment gain. But if we lower the taxes on the gains, then you can keep more of it. So therefore, more people are going to want to invest more because they get to keep more of their money. And investment is great, so you can increase the GDP, right? C plus I. The next one is infrastructure, right? Buildings and roads, public works, right? The better those things are, like if you can improve the quality of delivering water to someone's house, then you can save water, and that's going to save you a ton of money. Special economic zones, that's where certain countries, okay, will offer you free trade by going through them, okay? So it's usually an access to a port where basically the government does not tax trade. So you can go to this one country and then trade from there for free. You don't have to pay the extra tax for trading there. And that's great in terms of trying to send out your exports. Scientific research is a very important thing in terms of economic growth because you can create new things out of science. So by investing into scientific research, governments can support scientific research and technical training that helps to create and spread new technologies. Governments can also provide a legal environment to protect the ability of inventors to profit from their inventions. That's why we have things like patents, where basically if you create an invention and you really want to make it, you can apply for a patent where you can basically make that good by yourself for 20 years. Okay? So these are the healthy things for an economic growth. So in the next chapter, we'll talk about unemployment and inflation, and those are great as well. So I'll see you there.